And so they developed this, what they call the World Trade Center dust signature. And part of the signature is that those metallic spheres, those iron spheres. And they, photograph it just like that in their document. And they're not the only ones. And so these metallic spheres are in the dust. There just isn't any question about it.
I don't think they realized what the metallic spheres were at Deutsche Bank when they did this.
Oh no, and they're right, and they write that these are to be expected, but they give no credible reason for expecting it. They say, well, high temperatures and steel-bearing columns or something like that. Well, how high? Not high enough. The official story doesn't suppose temperatures nearly high enough to produce iron spheres. Plus, steel, how do you get iron spheres from steel? I mean, there has to be a process that goes through. And thermite will produce that. Iron is a product of thermite. You can have a thermite reaction and produce exactly those spheres. So that's exactly what you'd expect to get with thermite, and you can prove that with experiments. And in fact, even with the chips, the little red-gray chips that have been found in this most recent study, you heat those up to when they explode, and they produce tiny, iron-rich microspheres, just like what is found throughout the dust.
We have the thermite reaction here in the paper. It's Fe stands for iron, Fe2O3, that's the iron oxide from high school chemistry, plus 2 aluminum atoms, 2Al, and the reaction produces Al2O3, aluminum oxide, plus 2 iron atoms. And that reaction produces a lot of heat. And if you put carbon in, you mix these particles in very finely and add carbon, the carbon produces a gas, which produces the explosion, I believe.
It could be. I don't know the chemistry that well, but I do know that they've done tests on this and shown that when you ignite these chips, that they do produce these iron spheres.
I read this whole article here, and they go into the. There's a picture here of where the Trade Center was painted or fireproofed in 2000, 2001, and it says the sole gels of nanothermites are described in the literature as being very stable and safe to handle in liquid form. They can be applied to surfaces by spray or even paintbrush. It is entirely possible that the explosives were applied to the building disguised as a paint or as a spray-on fireproofing. And we know that the buildings were closed just before the attack, and that there was work done in there. So the people applying the explosives may not have had any idea of what they were doing.
That's true. I mean, and I don't want to speculate too much on who or how exactly, but that's something. I mean, it indicates a line of investigative inquiry that needs to be pursued.
I wonder why the official investigation didn't pursue this line of inquiry.
Well, I mean, they didn't pursue anything. I mean, Norman Mineta, I'm probably familiar with his testimony where he says he's in the bunker with Cheney, and this is at the time when this is kind of changing topics here, but the flight was about to the flight that hit the Pentagon was coming in, and a young man would come up to Vice President Cheney and say, the plane is 50 miles out. And then he'd come back a few minutes later and say, the plane is 30 miles out. And then when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said, do the orders still stand? And this is Norman Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation, in his testimony to Congress, or to the 9/11 Commission. Do the orders still stand, the young man asked. And Vice President Cheney whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Now, what was the commission's response to that? Did they subpoena the young man? I mean, who is this guy? What were the orders? No, they just dropped it. So, and he wasn't even mentioned in the report.
It makes one wonder. George Bush resisted an investigation, but the victims of the collapse insisted on it, and after a year, finally there is this investigation.
Yeah.
But the investigation is not a real investigation.
Yeah.
It's more like a cover-up, wouldn't you say?
I would. And you know, a great documentary, I happen to have it with me right here on that, is 9/11 Press for Truth. Maybe I should hold that up. It's, I think, for anybody who's just now being exposed to these ideas, this is probably the best introduction to it. It's the most professionally done. It's the story of the widows pressing for truth, to trying to get this commission to find out what happened, and their response to how the commission went, as well as a timeline developed by a researcher, Paul Thompson, who was very influential to them in their attempt to try to figure out for themselves what happened here. So it's an excellent documentary, and it's every claim in here is sourced to very mainstream news. So it's a great place to start. It doesn't give you all pieces to the puzzle, but it gives you pieces that you can rely on. So I recommend it.
You mentioned loose change before.
Yeah.
That's another video. Is this better than loose change?
Well, they're different. I mean, loose change is more provocative. Loose change is, you know, more fun to watch, one might say. You know, the music is more engaging. You know, there are some things that they may have gotten wrong on loose change. There's some controversies and so on. This. I mean, it's easier to look at loose change if you're somebody who's very skeptical and just say, look, you know, these are young guys, you know, and maybe you know, find something that's a little bit wrong with it and then just dismiss the whole thing. It's much more difficult, although this doesn't go as far in the claims that it makes. It's much more difficult to dismiss. You know, the evidence that's presented in this film. That's my assessment, and that's why I think it's the best place to start.
You were saying that you first became interested in 9/11 in 2006. I remember when 9/11 happened. I was living in Albany, New York, and I watched on TV. And even on the TV, you could see the little puffs of smoke coming out of the sides of the building, and it was evident that the buildings were coming down smoothly, not as if they were pancaking. And but I remember I said to a friend at that time, "This looks an awful lot like the Reichstag," but nobody else seemed to be. I thought, well, that's too far-fetched. It can't be. But then I remember about 2005, I saw one of the videos. I think it may have been Loose Change 1, and right away I realized, you know, yeah, that's what happened, and that's when I first became interested. And since then I've seen these other videos, and there's a group of us here in Burlington that are asking for a new investigation. We're not saying it's one way or it's the other way, but it's obvious that what we need is a real independent investigation. And the group has sent out a letter in March. There's a 3-page letter here signed by about 10 people, and who call themselves Vermonters for a real 9/11 investigation. And it was sent to Senator Leahy, Senator Sanders, Representative Welch, Governor Douglas, Attorney General Sorrell, members of the Vermont Supreme Court, Vermont senators, Vermont representatives, Vermont media professionals, and other selected recipients. And we included 2 DVDs with it to try to initiate an investigation. There was a ballot item calling for the city of Burlington to advise Vermont's congressional delegation to demand a new, thorough, and truly independent forensic investigation that fully addresses the many questions surrounding the tragic events of September 11, 2001. 37% of those who voted supported the measure, including majorities in the 2 downtown wards where there was actually a campaign. The other wards, there was no real campaign, so that may be the reason we didn't get a majority vote.